The universe was quiet. It had been quiet for 3,000 years. Ambassador Kethara stood in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime, watching the light from 47 different worlds shine through the crystal walls. Her body looked like living glass, and when she moved, colors danced across her surface like rainbows. She was beautiful in a way that humans had never seen before, because humans had never been invited to see it. The Galactic Confederation was perfect. Every species had their place, every world had its purpose. Trade moved between the stars like clockwork. When problems arose, they were solved with careful words and patient negotiation. War was something that existed only in ancient history books, gathering dust in forgotten libraries. Kethara had lived for 800 years, and she had never seen violence. Her people, the Zephyrians, had evolved beyond such crude things. They spoke in musical tones and solved conflicts through harmony. The very idea of hurting another being made her feel sick. Today was special. The Council was about to sign the Harmony Accords, a treaty that would ensure peace for another 1,000 years. Representatives from every member species had gathered to witness this historic moment. The Etherians floated in their biosuits, their forms shifting like liquid mercury. The Void Dancers moved with grace that defied gravity. The Crystalline Collective hummed in perfect mathematical harmony. Everything was as it should be. 5,000 light-years away, Captain Jake Morrison was having a very different kind of day. The exploration ship Discovery shook as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Jake gripped the arms of his command chair. The stars wheeled around them as the ship's systems came back online. He was a solid man in his 40s, with gray starting to show in his brown hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting at monitor screens. "Status report," he called. "Out." "All systems green, Captain," replied Engineer Pete Collins from his station. Pete was younger, maybe 30, with quick hands and a mind that understood machines better than people. He had volunteered for this mission to get away from Earth's crowded cities and polluted skies. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from the communications console. She was in her late 20s, smart and eager, the daughter of immigrants who had fought in the resource wars. "Captain, I'm picking up some strange readings, energy signatures I've never seen before." Dr. Kevin Walsh practically bounced in his seat at the science station. He was the team's xenobiologist, a thin man with wild hair who had dreamed of meeting alien life since he was a child. "Jake, you need to see this. The energy patterns are artificial, definitely artificial." Commander Lisa Barnes, the ship's tactical officer, frowned as she studied her displays. She was a career military officer who had served in Earth's last great conflict before transferring to the Exploration Corps. "Captain, those readings are massive. Whatever's out there, it's bigger than anything we've built." Jake stared at the main screen where dots of light marked energy sources scattered throughout the Centauri system. Each dot represented technology beyond anything Earth had achieved. His crew of 23 had been traveling for 6 months, following radio signals that had been detected by Earth's deep space arrays. They had expected to find empty worlds or maybe some ancient ruins. They had not expected to find this. "How many ships are we looking at?" Jake asked. "Ships?" Lisa's voice was tight. "Captain, I don't think these are ships. I think we're looking at cities, space cities." The Discovery had been Earth's most ambitious project. Humanity had finally developed faster-than-light travel, and they had immediately started exploring. The ship was built for long-range missions, equipped with everything they needed to survive in the void between stars. But it was also armed, because Earth had learned that survival often required violence. Jake had fought in the resource wars, the brutal conflicts that had torn Earth apart before the global accords were signed. He had seen what happened when different groups competed for the same limited resources. He had learned that in space, you trusted carefully and prepared for the worst. "Amy, try to make contact," he ordered. "Kevin, I want everything you can. Tell me about those energy signatures." "Lisa, keep our weapons powered down but ready. Pete, make sure our engines are prepared for emergency acceleration." Amy Rodriguez began broadcasting on multiple frequencies, sending mathematical sequences and basic pictographs. She had studied first contact protocols, but those had been written by theorists who had never actually met an alien. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. This was the moment humanity had dreamed of for centuries. Meanwhile, on Nexus Prime, the celebrations were beginning. Supreme Coordinator Thanel raised his forearms in the traditional gesture of harmony. His species, the Architects, had built most of the Confederation's great structures. They were tall and graceful, with silver skin that reflected light like mirrors. "Today we make history," he announced to the assembly. "The Harmony Accords will ensure that our children's children live in the same peace we have known." The various species responded with their traditional acknowledgments. The Etherians sang in frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. The crystalline collective chimed like distant bells. The void dancers performed a ritual movement that was both greeting and blessing. No one mentioned the outer spiral arms of the galaxy. Why would they? The surveys had been completed centuries ago. Nothing lived out there except primitive bacteria and empty worlds. The Confederation had grown inward, toward the bright center of the galaxy, where resources were abundant and space was vast. Back on the Discovery, Dr. Walsh was growing more excited by the minute. "Jake, these readings are incredible. The technology level is centuries ahead of ours, maybe thousands of years ahead. And there are dozens of different energy signatures. I think we're looking at multiple species working together." Jake felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Multiple species meant politics. Politics meant alliances and enemies and territories. Earth's history was full of stories about what happened when a less advanced civilization met a more advanced one. It usually didn't end well for the primitive society. "Any response to our transmissions?" he asked Amy. "Nothing yet, Captain, but I'm detecting some kind of scanning beam. They know we're here." On Nexus Prime, a junior technician named Velara was having the strangest day of her career. She worked in the Deep Space Monitoring Division, a job that was normally so boring that most people fell asleep at their posts. Her species, the listeners, had evolved incredible hearing, which made them perfect for detecting faint signals from space. "Supervisor," she called out, her voice carrying harmonic overtones of confusion. "I'm detecting an artificial construct in the outer Centauri region." Supervisor Quental glided over to her station. The listeners moved like underwater creatures, even in atmosphere. "Centauri? That system was surveyed 800 years ago, nothing there but gas giants and asteroids." "I know, Supervisor. But the energy signature is definitely artificial, and it's transmitting some kind of mathematical sequence. Very primitive, but clearly intelligent in origin." Quental felt a flutter of interest. In 3,000 years of galactic peace, truly, unusual events were rare. "Send a message to the Etherian fleet. Have them dispatch a greeting squadron. Probably just some automated probe that's been drifting for millennia, but we should investigate." The Etherian fleet was not really a fleet in the military sense. The Confederation had no military, because there was no one to fight. Instead, they had ceremonial ships designed for exploration, rescue operations, and diplomatic missions. The vessels were works of art, their hulls shaped like living creatures, and decorated with flowing patterns that told the history of their species. Admiral Velthos received the message while attending the Harmony Accords ceremony. He was a being of incredible beauty, his form shifting between states of matter like a living aurora. The Etherians had evolved in the gas clouds between stars, and they saw space itself as their natural habitat. "A new contact," he mused to his aide. "How delightful. It has been decades since we welcomed a new species to the Confederation. Prepare 3 ships for the ritual of peaceful greeting. Make sure we have the finest poets and musicians aboard. First contact is always a moment of wonder." The stage was set. 2 civilizations, shaped by completely different experiences, were about to meet. One had known only peace and cooperation. The other had been forged in the fires of competition and conflict. Neither side understood what was about to happen. But, in the cold vacuum between the stars, the Discovery's sensors detected 3 objects accelerating toward their position, and Captain Jake Morrison made the decision that would change galactic history forever. The 3 Etherian ships moved through space like dancers, their hulls shifting and flowing in patterns that had been perfected over thousands of years. Each vessel was a masterpiece of biotechnology, grown rather than built, shaped by artists, who understood that function and beauty were the same thing. Captain Zathon commanded the lead ship, the Harmony of Worlds. He was ancient even by Etherean standards, having lived for over 2,000 years. His body glowed with soft blue light, and when he spoke, his voice carried the wisdom of centuries. He had welcomed 43 species into the Confederation, and each first contact had been a moment of joy. "Begin the ritual of peaceful greeting," he commanded his crew. "Let our new friends hear the music of welcome." The three ships began to sing. Their hulls resonated with harmonic frequencies that told the story of the Confederation's founding, the great peace that had lasted 3 millennia, and the joy of meeting new species among the stars. It was a complex composition that typically took 6 hours to perform in full, each movement building on the last to create a symphony of understanding. On the Discovery, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez nearly fell out of her chair as the alien signals flooded her communications array. The sounds were unlike anything she had ever heard, beautiful and haunting and completely incomprehensible. "Captain, they're transmitting on multiple frequencies simultaneously," she reported, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "It's not random noise. There's a pattern here, something incredibly sophisticated." Dr. Kevin Walsh was recording everything, his scientific mind racing to understand what they were hearing. "Jake, this is amazing. They're using harmonic mathematics. Each frequency is related to the others by precise mathematical relationships. It's like they're speaking in music." Commander Lisa Barnes watched her tactical display with growing unease. The 3 alien ships had arranged themselves in a triangular formation around the Discovery. On Earth, that was called an encirclement maneuver. Her training told her to assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. "Captain, they've got us surrounded," she said quietly. "If they wanted to attack, this would be the perfect formation." Captain Jake Morrison stared at the main screen, watching the alien vessels move with impossible grace. They were beautiful, but beauty could be deceptive. During the resource wars, he had seen orbital habitats that looked like art galleries, but housed weapons that could crack continents. The alien ships were 3 times the size of the Discovery, and their energy signatures were off the charts. If they were hostile, his ship wouldn't last 5 minutes in a fight. But if they were peaceful, his next decision could determine whether humanity joined whatever civilization they represented or made enemies of forces beyond imagining. "How long have they been transmitting?" Jake asked. 17 minutes and counting, Amy replied. "Captain, I think they're waiting for a response. The pattern keeps repeating with slight variations, like they're trying different languages." Jake's military experience told him to be cautious. Unknown contacts using unknown technology in an advantageous tactical position. Standard procedure was to maintain distance and prepare for emergency action, but his explorer's instincts told him this might be humanity's greatest opportunity. "Shields up," he ordered. "Charge the railgun batteries, but keep them powered down. Amy, try to respond to their transmissions. Send them mathematical sequences, basic physics, anything that shows we're intelligent." The moment the Discovery's shields activated, every sensor array on Nexus Prime screamed warnings that hadn't been heard in 3,000 years. Technician Velara stared at her displays in shock. "Supervisor, the unknown contact just activated defensive systems, energy barriers of some kind." Supervisor Quental glided over to her station, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "Defensive systems? Are you certain?" "Positive, Supervisor. And they're powering up what looks like weapon arrays. Kinetic projectile systems, I think." The news raced through the Confederation's communication networks at light speed. On 47 worlds, beings who had never known violence tried to understand what they were seeing. The concepts were so foreign that many species lacked words to describe them. Supreme Coordinator Thanel received the alert in the middle of signing the Harmony Accords, and his 4 hands froze over the ceremonial tablet. "What do you mean, defensive systems?" he asked the messenger. "Why would anyone need to defend themselves?" Back in the Centauri system, Captain Zathon was equally confused. In 2,000 years of life, he had never encountered a species that responded to greeting with hostility. The concept was so alien to him that he couldn't process what was happening. "They've raised some kind of energy barrier," his sensor operator reported, "and their weapon systems are active." "Weapons?" Zathan's voice carried harmonics of bewilderment. "Why would an exploration vessel carry weapons?" The Etherian ships continued their greeting song, but now it carried undertones of confusion and concern. The mathematical beauty of their transmission began to break down as they struggled to understand why the newcomers seemed afraid. On the Discovery, Dr. Walsh was making progress with the alien transmissions. His xenobiology training included basic linguistics, and he was starting to recognize patterns in the harmonic sequences. "Jake, I think I'm beginning to understand," he said excitedly. "These aren't just random signals. They're trying to teach us their language through mathematical relationships. Look at this." He put the audio pattern on the main speakers, and the bridge filled with alien music. It was hauntingly beautiful, but also somehow urgent, as if the singers were trying desperately to communicate something important. "They're not attacking," Walsh continued. "This is a greeting. They're trying to welcome us." But Commander Barnes was watching her tactical display, and what she saw made her blood run cold. "Captain, one of the alien ships is moving closer, range decreasing to weapons distance." What Lisa didn't understand was that the Etherian vessel was performing the second movement of the greeting ritual, which required approaching the new contact to exchange cultural gifts. Captain Yellamora, who commanded the approaching ship, was preparing to transmit the most beautiful poetry in Etherian literature, combined with mathematical proofs that had taken centuries to develop. Jake Morrison saw an alien warship closing to attack range, and every instinct honed by years of brutal warfare told him to act first and ask questions later. The resource wars had taught him that hesitation meant death, and mercy was a luxury that only the living could afford. "All stop. On the approaching vessel," he ordered. "Lisa, target their engines, warning shots only." But the Etherian ship didn't stop. It couldn't stop, because Captain Yellamora was following a ritual that had been performed the same way for 3,000 years. He began transmitting the poetry of stars, verses that described the beauty of creation and the joy of intelligence, meeting intelligence across the vast cosmos. "Captain, they're not responding to our warnings," Barnes reported. "They're accelerating toward us and broadcasting some kind of signal. It could be a targeting system." Jake Morrison made the hardest decision of his life. Fire. The Discovery's railgun batteries spoke with the voice of human warfare. Tungsten slugs accelerated to significant percentages of light speed, tore through space with precise, deadly accuracy. They struck the Etherian vessel's flowing hull and punched through like it was made of tissue paper. Captain Yellamora had enough time to feel surprise before his ship died around him. The Etherian vessel, designed for exploration and art, had no armor, no shields, no defensive systems of any kind. It simply came apart, its beautiful hull splitting along stress lines that had never been designed to handle violence. The other two Etherian ships stopped their greeting song in the middle of a mathematical proof about the nature of infinity. For the first time in their species' recorded history, they experienced terror. "Yellamora is gone," Captain Zathan whispered, his voice carrying harmonics of grief that his species had no words for. "They destroyed him. They destroyed him completely." On the Discovery, the bridge fell silent as they watched the alien ship die. Pieces of what had once been a work of art drifted away into the void, leaking atmosphere and strange glowing fluids that might have been blood. "My God," Dr. Walsh whispered. "What have we done?" Amy Rodriguez was crying as she listened to the transmissions from the surviving alien ships. The harmonious music had changed to something else, something that needed no translation. It was the sound of beings discovering that evil existed in the universe. Jake Morrison stared at the debris field and felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest. "Amy, are you still receiving their transmissions?" "Yes, Captain." "But they've changed. They're not trying to communicate anymore. They're mourning." The two surviving Etherian ships began to withdraw, their movements no longer graceful, but desperate. They transmitted emergency signals toward the inner galaxy, messages that carried a simple and terrible truth. The new species was violent beyond comprehension. On Nexus Prime, the celebration stopped. The Harmony Accords lay unsigned on their ceremonial table as news of the first act of violence in 3,000 years spread through the communication networks. 47 species struggled to understand what had happened and what it meant for their perfect peace. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began 12 hours after the first murder in 3,000 years. Representatives from all 47 species gathered in the Great Hall of Nexus Prime, but the usual harmony was broken. Fear had entered paradise, and no one knew what to do with it. Representative Quaresh of the Harmonious Collective stood at the center of the assembly. Her people were tall and graceful, with skin that changed colors to reflect their emotions. Right now, she was a deep purple that meant confusion and sorrow. "The evidence is clear," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "The unknown species, these humans, destroyed 3 of our ships without any attempt at peaceful contact. They fired upon vessels that were performing the ritual of greeting." The assembly erupted in sounds that had never been heard before. The crystalline collective rang like broken bells. The void dancers moved in patterns that spoke of chaos and fear. The Etherians who had survived the attack sang funeral songs for their dead. Supreme Coordinator Thanel raised his forearms for silence. His silver skin, normally bright and reflective, had turned dull gray. "This is unprecedented in our history. We have protocols for trade disputes, territorial disagreements, even philosophical conflicts. But we have no protocols for unprovoked violence." Ambassador Cathara's crystalline form cast fractured rainbows across the walls. "What kind of species arms their exploration vessels? What kind of civilization teaches their people to shoot first and ask questions later?" The questions hung in the air like a challenge. For 3 millennia, the Confederation had grown inward, toward the bright center of the galaxy where resources were unlimited and space was vast. They had never needed to compete, never faced extinction, never learned that sometimes survival required terrible choices. On the outer edge of the Centauri system, Captain Jake Morrison faced his own crisis. The Discovery hung in space like a guilty secret, its crew struggling with what they had done. The ship's medical bay had been converted into a makeshift counseling center, where Dr. Walsh tried to help his crewmates deal with the reality of killing beings who had only wanted to say hello. Engineer Pete Collins sat in the corner of the mess hall staring at his hands. "I fine-tuned those railguns," he said quietly. "I made sure they would fire straight and true, and they did. They killed people who were singing to us." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez hadn't slept since the attack. She kept replaying the alien transmissions, the beautiful music that had turned to mourning songs. "They were trying to teach us their language," she whispered. "They were sharing poetry and mathematics and art. And we answered with bullets." Commander Lisa Barnes remained at her post, but her confidence was shattered. All her training, all her experience from the resource wars, had told her to prepare for the worst. And when the worst seemed to be approaching, she had acted according to her training. Now 3 beings were dead because she had been ready to fight. Captain Morrison called his senior staff to the bridge. They gathered around the conference table, but no one wanted to meet his eyes. They all shared the guilt of what had happened. "The question now is what we do next," Jake said. "We can try to run back to Earth and warn them what's out here. Or, we can stay and try to fix this." Dr. Walsh looked up from his data pad. "Jake, I've been analyzing the transmissions we received before and after the attack. These beings, they've never experienced violence. Their language doesn't even have words for war or murder or conquest. They literally cannot understand what we did to them." "That might make them more dangerous," Lisa said quietly. "If they don't understand violence, they won't understand mercy either. They might decide we need to be eliminated." As if summoned by her words, the Discovery's sensors detected new contacts approaching. Not 3 ships this time, but dozens. The Confederation's response was massive and immediate. Fleet Admiral Zarath of the Void Dancers commanded the peacekeeping Armada, 47 ships representing every member species of the Confederation. But these were not warships in any sense that humans would understand. They were rescue vessels, scientific platforms, and diplomatic couriers pressed into service for a mission their crews barely comprehended. Admiral Zarath was a being of incredible beauty, her form shifting between states of matter like living, aurora. Her species had evolved in the void between stars, and they moved through space with grace that defied physics. She had lived for 1,500 years, and had never given an order to harm another living being. Our mission is to disable the hostile vessel and capture its crew for questioning, she told her fleet commanders through quantum communication links. We must understand why they committed this act of violence. Perhaps they are diseased or their minds have been affected by some unknown pathogen. The Confederation fleet approached the Discovery in perfect formation, their ships moving like a school of fish through the void. Each vessel was a masterpiece of technology and art, built by species that had turned engineering into philosophy and warfare, into obsolete history. Captain Morrison watched them come and felt the weight of impossible choices. 47 ships against 1. If this had been the Resource Wars, he would have surrendered immediately. But this wasn't the Resource Wars, and Earth's survival might depend on what happened next. They're not responding to our communication attempts, Amy reported. I'm broadcasting surrender offers on every frequency, but they're not acknowledging. What Amy didn't understand was that the Confederation fleet was trying to respond, but their concept of communication was completely different from humanity's. They were transmitting philosophical treatises about the nature of peace, offering to share their advanced technology in exchange for understanding why the humans had committed violence. Dr. Walsh was frantically trying to decode the alien transmissions when he made a discovery that changed everything. Jake, these ships aren't armed. I mean, they literally have no weapons. They're trying to capture us without hurting us. How do you capture a ship without weapons? Pete asked. Tractor beams, maybe, or some kind of disabling field. But they're not planning to destroy us. They want us alive. Commander Barnes studied her tactical display with growing horror. The alien ships were surrounding them in a complex three-dimensional formation that would make escape impossible, but their approach was slow and careful, like they were trying not to frighten a wounded animal. Captain, they're trying to take us intact, she reported. If they succeed, we'll be prisoners. Earth will never know what happened to us, and they'll never know what's waiting out here. Jake Morrison had fought in humanity's last great war, and he understood what defeat meant. During the Resource Wars, prisoners were interrogated, studied, and often executed when they were no longer useful. He had no reason to believe these aliens would be any different, despite their peaceful appearance. The first Confederation ship to make contact was the Wisdom of Ages, commanded by Captain Velnara of the Thoughtful Ones. Her species communicated through complex mathematical equations, and she was trying to establish peaceful dialogue by transmitting prime number sequences, followed by philosophical questions about the nature of existence. They're scanning us with some kind of beam, Lisa reported. Energy readings are off the charts. They could probably disable our engines from this range. Jake made the decision that would turn a tragic misunderstanding into a galactic war. All batteries, open fire, target their engines. If we're going down, we're taking some of them with us. The Discovery's railguns spoke again, but this time they faced opponents who were trying very hard not to kill the humans while subduing them. The result was a battle unlike anything in galactic history. The Confederation ships scattered as tungsten slugs tore through space where they had been moments before. Their crews, trained for rescue operations and scientific research, struggled to understand what was happening. Some ships tried to retreat. Others attempted to use non-lethal suppression beams. A few tried to interpose themselves between the human vessel and their more vulnerable companions. Captain Morrison fought like a man possessed, using every dirty trick from humanity's violent past. He used the Discovery's superior acceleration to break formation attempts. He targeted the alien ship's obvious weak points, the sensor arrays and communication equipment that they had never thought to armor. He fought like someone who expected no mercy and would give none in return. The Battle of Centauri lasted 18 hours. When it was over, 12 Confederation ships were destroyed or crippled, and the Discovery was a drifting wreck with half its crew dead or injured. But Jake Morrison had achieved something impossible. He had fought the combined might of 47 species to a standstill. The surviving Confederation ships withdrew to a safe distance, their crews traumatized by their first experience with warfare. They had tried to capture one small exploration vessel without hurting its crew, and they had learned that violence was a skill that required practice to survive. Admiral Zarath floated in the command center of her flagship, her beautiful form flickering with colors that meant grief and confusion. Around her, the survivors of the battle tried to treat wounded crewmates and repair damaged ships. They had never imagined that rescue operations could be more dangerous than exploring black holes. 3 months after the Battle of Centauri, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. Refugee camps dotted the inner systems as entire species fled their homeworlds. The beautiful orbital cities that had taken thousands of years to build were being abandoned as their inhabitants packed what they could carry and ran toward the galactic core. The humans were coming, and they were bringing hell with them. Admiral Connor Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching through the view screen as his fleet emerged from hyperspace. 27 ships of the Earth Defense Force had responded to Captain Morrison's distress signal, and every one of them was built for war. Hayes was nothing like Morrison. Where the Discovery's captain had been an explorer forced into violence, Hayes was a professional soldier who understood that war was humanity's oldest and most terrible art. He had spent 15 years fighting in the resource wars, where defeat meant extinction and mercy was a luxury that only the dead could afford. "Status report," Hayes ordered as his ships took formation around the crippled Discovery. Captain Lucy Campbell, his tactical officer, studied the sensor readings with professional interest. Campbell was a veteran of the Martian Liberation Campaign, where human fleets had fought desperate battles among the asteroid fields. She knew how to read a battlefield, and what she saw impressed her. "Sir, the Discovery engaged 47 enemy vessels and survived. Hull integrity is at 30%, but the ship is still functional. I count 12 confirmed enemy kills and significant damage to at least 20 more targets." Hayes nodded grimly. Morrison had done well for an exploration captain thrown into an impossible situation, but exploration was over now. Earth had sent soldiers to finish what the scientists had started. Dr. Paul Stewart, the fleet's xenobiologist, was already aboard the Discovery, interviewing the survivors and studying the alien technology they had recovered. What he learned challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about civilization. Stewart was a thin, nervous man who had studied theoretical xenobiology for 20 years without ever expecting to meet actual aliens. Now he sat across from Coordinator Thaynell, one of the few Confederation officials they had captured during the battle. The alien leader was bound with restraints that seemed almost insulting in their simplicity. His silver skin had turned dark gray, and his forearms hung limp with despair. He had lived for 800 years in a universe where such treatment was literally unthinkable. "I don't understand," Thaynell said through the translation device. "Your people fight over resources that exist in abundance. Your worlds produce enough food to feed 100 times your population. Your star provides more energy than you could use in a million years. Why do you make war?" Dr. Stewart laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Abundance? On Earth, we've got 12 billion people fighting over the scraps of a dying planet. We've strip-mined continents and poisoned oceans just to survive another decade. We learned to share too, Coordinator. We share bullets." The truth emerged slowly through interrogations and captured databases. Humanity hadn't evolved in the galaxies, protected inner systems where resources were unlimited and space was vast. Earth orbited a young, violent star in a region filled with gamma-ray bursts, asteroid impacts, and solar flares that could sterilize a planet in minutes. Every human alive was descended from survivors of ice ages that lasted millions of years, supervolcanic eruptions that blotted out the sun, and mass extinctions that killed 90% of all life on Earth. They had learned to fight because everything in their environment was trying to kill them. Captain Lisa Wong of the UES Retribution commanded the assault on the Zephyrian colonies in the Vega system. The elegant crystal cities offered no resistance when the human fleet arrived, their inhabitants having never conceived of orbital bombardment or military occupation. Wong was a small woman with scars on her hands from working in the engine rooms of refugee ships during Earth's ecological collapse. She had joined the military because it was the only organization that still had enough resources to feed its people. Now she watched through her ship's cameras as human construction crews dismantled thousand-year-old art installations to build defensive positions. It seems almost wrong, her executive officer commented as they watched a crystal spire that had taken centuries to grow being reduced to raw materials in hours. Wrong? Wong turned to look at him. These people built paradise and then expected it to last forever. They never learned that beautiful things need ugly protection. The Zephyrian ambassador Kethara stood in chains in the human command center, her crystalline body reflecting the harsh lights of military equipment. She had volunteered to be captured, hoping to negotiate for her people's safety. What she found was a species that thought like machines and planned for apocalypse. Your people will resist, she told Wong. They will unite against you. All 47 species will combine their fleets and drive you back to whatever dark corner of space you came from. Wong smiled grimly. Lady, your people don't know how to fight. They're artists and philosophers and poets. We're killers who learn to read. Guess who wins when push comes to shove? The human advance was methodical and brutal. Earth's strategists had studied the Confederation's structure and identified its weaknesses. The alien civilization was built on trade and cooperation, which made it incredibly efficient but also incredibly fragile. Cut the supply lines, capture the industrial centers, and the whole system would collapse. Engineer Marcus Chen led the reconstruction of the Etherian shipyards above the gas giant Narration. The aliens had built their facilities like living organisms, growing ships instead of manufacturing them. The technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth had developed, but it was also completely defenseless. Chen was a practical man who had spent his career building things that worked under the worst possible conditions. He looked at the alien shipyards and saw beautiful but impractical art installations. Within weeks, he had retrofitted them with armor plating, defensive weapons, and production lines designed to churn out warships instead of exploration vessels. The aliens built for a universe without conflict, he explained to his construction crews. They assumed that everyone would play by the same peaceful rules forever. We're going to teach them that the universe doesn't care about their rules. The psychological impact on the Confederation was devastating. Species that had known only cooperation for 3,000 years suddenly found themselves dealing with concepts they had no words for. Military strategy, prisoner interrogation, resource denial, scorched earth tactics. These were ideas so foreign that many aliens couldn't even understand them when they were explained. Dr. Stewart interviewed dozens of captured aliens and always came away with the same conclusion. They weren't stupid or weak or cowardly. They were simply products of an environment that had never required them to develop the skills that humans considered essential for survival. You don't understand, Coordinator Thanel explained during one session. We achieved peace because we learned that cooperation always produces better results than competition. When everyone works together, everyone benefits. Your species fights over things that could be shared. Shared? Stewart shook his head. You've never faced real scarcity. You've never had to choose between your family's survival and your neighbors. When there isn't enough to go around, cooperation becomes a luxury you can't afford. The reports that reached Admiral Hayes painted a picture of systematic conquest. Human forces had captured 18 star systems in 3 months, taking control of industrial facilities, mining operations, and population centers with minimal resistance. The Confederation's response had been confused and ineffective, their fleets designed for rescue operations rather than warfare. But Hayes was a student of military history, and he knew that easy victories often led to difficult defeats. The aliens were learning, adapting, beginning to understand the nature of the threat they faced. Soon they would stop trying to capture human ships intact and start trying to destroy them completely. Sir, Captain Campbell reported from her station, we're receiving transmissions from the inner systems. The Confederation is mobilizing everything they have. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, all converging on our position. Hayes studied the tactical display with professional interest. The alien fleet was massive, overwhelming in numbers and technological capability. Under normal circumstances, any sane commander would order an immediate retreat. But these weren't normal circumstances. Earth had sent 27 ships to face an entire galaxy, and those ships carried the accumulated knowledge of humanity's violent past. Hayes had weapons that the aliens couldn't imagine and tactics they couldn't understand. "Send a message to Earth," he ordered. "Tell them we've made contact with a galactic civilization. Tell them they're more advanced than us in every way except the one that matters. And tell them to send everything we have, because we're about to fight the war that will determine whether humanity has a future among the stars." The Battle of Vega would be remembered as the moment when two incompatible philosophies met in open space, and only one survived. But first, both sides had to learn what they were really fighting for. 2 years after first contact, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The great crystal spires of Nexus Prime still reached toward the stars, but now they were surrounded by human defense platforms and patrol ships. The Galactic Confederation was gone, replaced by something that had never existed before. A truly unified galaxy under human leadership. Director Ryan Clark sat in what had once been the Grand Assembly Chamber, looking across a simple metal table at former Supreme Coordinator Thanael. Between them lay the Treaty of New Terra, a document that would reshape civilization itself. Clark was a former economist who had never expected to govern star systems. He was a quiet man with graying hair and tired eyes, someone who understood numbers better than people. But the war had promoted many unlikely individuals to positions they never wanted, and Clark had proven surprisingly good at turning conquest into cooperation. "You could have destroyed us completely," Thanael said, his silver skin still showing the dull gray of defeat. "Your fleets, your weapons, your tactics. We had no defense against any of it. Why didn't you finish what you started?" Clark smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Because we learned something your people never had to. Winning a war is easy. Winning a peace is the hard part." The truth was more complicated than either man wanted to admit. The final battle above Nexus Prime had lasted 3 days and had been closer than anyone expected. Admiral Hayes had brought every ship Earth could spare, but the Confederation's combined fleet had numbered in the thousands. Technology and determination had won the day for humanity, but barely. The real turning point had come when Captain Jake Morrison, still commanding the rebuilt Discovery, had made an unprecedented decision. In the middle of the battle, with alien ships dying around him and human vessels being torn apart by weapons they barely understood, he had opened a communication channel to the enemy fleet. "This has to stop," he had broadcast on all frequencies. "We're destroying each other for no reason. We made a mistake, you made a mistake, but we can fix this if we try." Admiral Connor Hayes had been furious. You didn't negotiate in the middle of a battle, especially when you were winning. But Morrison had been there at the beginning, and his voice carried the weight of guilt and experience that couldn't be ignored. The ceasefire had held long enough for both sides to step back and really look at what they were fighting over. Dr. Kevin Walsh, now Director of Xenological Studies, stood in his laboratory aboard Harmony Station, watching human and alien scientists work together on projects that neither species could have completed alone. The violent species that had shown up late to galactic civilization was teaching the galaxy's peaceful races how to survive in a universe that didn't always reward virtue. "The irony is beautiful," Walsh told his assistant, Dr. Nara L., a Zephyrian scientist whose crystal skin reflected the lights of their shared experiments. "We came here as destroyers, but we're ending up as builders." Nara L. chimed softly, a sound that meant thoughtful consideration. "Your species brought chaos to our ordered universe, but perhaps order without the possibility of chaos is not truly stable." The new Galactic Commonwealth represented humanity's greatest achievement, and it wasn't military conquest. Earth's leaders had faced a choice after their victory. They could rule through force and fear, turning the galaxy into an empire built on violence, or they could try something that had never been attempted before. Chief Engineer Sarah Martinez stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching as human and alien construction crews worked together to build the first truly collaborative deep space facility. Human engineering efficiency combined with alien artistic vision was creating structures that were both beautiful and practical. "My grandfather fought in the resource wars," she told her Etherian colleague, Captain Velara. He used to say that humans were too stupid to build paradise but too stubborn to accept hell. Maybe he was right. Velara's form shifted colors as she considered the words. The Etherians had lost the most in the war, but they had also gained the most from the peace. Human protection allowed them to explore dangerous regions of space they had never dared to visit before. The Commonwealth worked because it addressed the fundamental weakness that had made the Confederation vulnerable. It prepared for conflict while working for peace. Human military doctrine was taught alongside alien philosophy. Confederation technology was shared with human strategic planning. Commander Amy Rodriguez, now Director of Interspecies Communications, finished her weekly report to Earth with mixed feelings. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been, but safety had come at a terrible price. The outer systems are fully integrated, she transmitted to the Sol communication array. Trade is flowing smoothly, and we've had no major conflicts in 6 months. The Void Dancers have completed their survey of the galactic rim, and the Crystalline Collective has agreed to share their quantum computation technology. She paused, thinking about the long journey from that first disastrous contact to this moment of genuine cooperation. We showed up late, violent and uninvited, she continued, but maybe that's what the galaxy needed. Sometimes paradise requires protectors, even if those protectors are far from perfect. The real test of the Commonwealth came when long-range sensors detected something approaching from the void between galaxies. The objects were clearly artificial, clearly hostile, and clearly more advanced than anything the Confederation had ever encountered. Admiral Hayes, now Supreme Military Commander of the Commonwealth Defense Force, stood in the war room aboard the battle station New Terra, watching the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The alien fleet approaching from dark space was massive and obviously hostile. Under the old Confederation, such a threat would have meant inevitable conquest or extinction. Defensive positions? Asked General Lisa Barnes, now Hayes' Chief of Staff. No, Hayes replied. We meet them at the galactic edge. Every ship, every species, every weapon we have. If they want our galaxy, they'll have to take it from all of us. The Third Battle of Centauri was fought 6 months later, and it was unlike anything in galactic history. Human tactical doctrine merged with alien technology, created fleets that moved like living organisms but struck like guided missiles. Confederation scientists provided weapons that human engineers turned into instruments of precise destruction. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the flagship Commonwealth, watched as ships from 47 different species fought alongside human vessels against the invaders from dark space. Etherian biotechnology created armor that could heal itself. Zephyrian crystal, matrices provided shields that could absorb and redirect energy. Human strategic planning turned a collection of peaceful races into the most effective military force the galaxy had ever seen. The battle lasted 2 weeks and ended in complete victory for the Commonwealth. The invaders, who had conquered 12 other galaxies through technological superiority and overwhelming force, found themselves facing something they had never encountered. A civilization that was prepared for war, but united in peace. After the victory celebration, Director Clark found himself back in the old assembly chamber, this time hosting representatives from the rescued galaxy of Andromeda. The surviving refugees told stories of civilizations that had fallen because they couldn't adapt, couldn't change, couldn't learn to fight when fighting became necessary. You saved more than just your own galaxy, the Andromedan ambassador said, through her translation device. You proved that peace and strength can exist together. You showed that civilized beings can learn to be uncivilized when civilization itself is threatened. Clark nodded, thinking about the long road from Morrison's first mistake to this moment of hope. The galaxy had learned that humans had indeed arrived late, violent, and uninvited. But they had also arrived with something that 3,000 years of peace had nearly forgotten. The knowledge that tomorrow could be better than today, but only if someone was willing to fight for it. The Commonwealth endured because it embraced a simple truth that the Confederation had never understood. In A universe that doesn't guarantee survival. The price of peace is eternal vigilance, and sometimes, the guardians of paradise must be those who have known hell. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their weapons or their tactics or their willingness to fight. It was their stubborn refusal to accept that things couldn't be better even when making them better required terrible choices. The stars were still beautiful, but now they were protected by those who understood that beauty was worth defending, even by those who could never be beautiful themselves.